Spring Island Trust Ice Cream Social. Chico came back from graduate school in California. He started a nightclub in Burlington with some other guys, and it was extremely well situated because between him and the bank where he had to go every day to deposit his proceeds, there was that new gas station, well, old gas station reconverted, which we all know now as the first Ben & Jerry scoop shop. And that was important for at least two reasons I know of. One is a great barter arrangement he had with Ben, which he may talk about. But more importantly, over the course of a couple of years, the guys in the shop realized they knew nothing about business. And so they needed a general manager. So Chico was the first general manager and then CEO, and saw the company grow from several tens of thousands of revenue a year to 90 million. Chico, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. What an introduction. Is there anybody here, rhetorical question I hope, anybody here who doesn't like ice cream? Of course not, that's why everybody's here. So there's a lot of different theories as to why we all love ice cream, why it's America's favorite dessert. The best theory I ever heard was one that Ben laid out for us back in 1983. We were invited to participate in an ice cream festival that was being held out in Chicago at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, this opulent hotel out by the airport. Now, in 1983, we were not selling our ice cream west of Albany, New York, so there was no reason at all for us to go out to Chicago and scoop ice cream, but Ben said, okay, this will be a good way to kill a weekend. So he, Jerry, and I got into a van on a Friday afternoon, drove nonstop out to Chicago. And the opening event of this festival was a panel discussion that Ben had been asked to participate in along with three other industry notables. And they had all been given the same homework assignment. They were supposed to explain why ice cream was America's favorite dessert and why we were so fascinated with it. And the first three speakers really didn't answer the question. They just cribbed some stuff out of the Introduction to an Ice Cream textbook. You know, they talked about how the first ice creams evolved from chilled wines, how Marco Polo had learned about ice cream from the Chinese in the 13th century, first ice cream cone at the St. Louis World's Fair. So they kind of just threw that out. And then it was Ben's turn. And, you know, Ben, as typical, did not put a lot of forethought into what it was he was going to say. So he gets up there with his napkin from breakfast. And Ben proceeded to compare the oral sensations that an adult experiences licking an ice cream cone with the oral sensations that a baby experiences suckling on his or her mother's breasts. This, he concluded, this was the reason why America was fascinated with ice cream. Nothing to do with Marco Polo. All right, now some of these pictures are going to be fuzzy because in putting this together, I kind of just sourced some stuff off the internet. It's amazing what you can find, but here are our guys. That's Ben on the left, that's Jerry on the right. These are their high school pictures from Calhoun High School out on Merrick, Long Island. And they met actually in 7th grade. The story that they tell is they met in gym class. They were out on the track and they were tasked with running the mile, and they were the two slowest, fattest kids. So they're lagging way, way behind all the other runners. And the coach, Coach Phelps, yells out at him, Cone, Greenfield, if you can't run the mile in under 7 minutes, you're going to have to do it again. And Ben, without missing a beat, says, but Coach, if we couldn't do it in under 7 minutes the first time, we're never going to do it in under 7 minutes the second time. And it was then, Jerry says, that he said, this is the guy I want to hang out with. So they went their separate ways after high school. Jerry went to Oberlin out in Ohio. Ben went to Colgate University, upstate New York. He chose that school because they had fireplaces in the dorms. And he only lasted a year there, and then he was doing an assortment of odd jobs, night mopper, Pinkerton guard. They gave him a holster, they didn't give him a gun. Jerry graduated from Oberlin and then applied to med school and got rejected everywhere. So they were kind of lost in terms of what it was that they were going to do with their futures. And in 1977, they decided to go into business together. So they had a couple ideas. One was that they would become cross-country truck drivers, but they rejected that. And instead, since they like to eat, they said we should do something with food. And their first idea was actually a business they were going to call UBS. United Bagel Services. But they priced the ovens out. The ovens were too expensive, so instead they settled on ice cream. Now, they had eaten ice cream, but they knew nothing about how to make it, but there was a ready solution for that. This is a true story. Penn State University had a correspondence course in ice cream manufacturing. $5. So they split the tuition, and they got A's on all the open book tests. So now they know how to make ice cream. The next thing they need to do is they got to figure out where's our homemade ice cream parlor going to be. Well, Ben had been hanging out in Saratoga Springs, New York. He said, that's a nice place. So they're working on their business plan and thinking they're going to open in Saratoga Springs. But while they're doing that, somebody beats them to the punch. Somebody opens a homemade ice cream parlor ahead of them. So they can't be the second one in. So they look at a map, a little further north, a little colder, Burlington, Vermont, college town, and that's where they decide to locate. And they find this great structure to open in. It's an abandoned gas station, Art Deco. It's got a metal skin, it's got a curved glass front. It's in a total state of disrepair. The roof leaks, the bathroom doesn't work. It's a total mess, but it's right across from City Hall Park. It's got a great location. So that's all for the good. But the downside of the gas station is they can only get a one-year lease. Now that becomes a challenge relative to their financing. Now, they were each going to throw in $4,000. Jerry had his $4,000, Ben had $2,000. He had to borrow the other $2,000 from his father. But their plan called for them to get a $20,000 SBA loan. But with a one-year lease, SBA said, no go, we're not going to lend you $20,000. So instead, the local banker at the Merchants Bank, Fred Burgess, sized them up for everything they were worth and lent them $4,000 on their good name. So they started their venture with a grand total of $12,000. And they opened in May of 1978. And that's not a picture of opening day, but that's the gas station. And it was an artistic success from day one. Lines out the door, very, very popular. It was so, they're making the ice cream on a rock salt and ice freezer. And hard to keep up with the demand, and in fact on many days they had to shut down early because they ran out of ice cream. They came up with the International No Ice Cream Cone sign, which is ice cream cone with a circle and a red slash through it. So it was a great success right from the get-go. They had a very good summer. Of course, sales in the winter, Vermont being Vermont, slowed right down, but somehow they survived. They got through that first winter, and they were so amazed that they were still in business 1 year later, and so thankful that they decided to hold a community celebration called Free Cone Day, which is just what it sounds like. It's a day when you can line up and get free ice cream, and the great part is after you get your ice cream, you can get back on the end of the line. I believe this picture was actually taken on a Free Cone Day. So to promote Free Cone Day, they put flyers up all over town, And on each of the flyers, there was a quote from the two founders. Ben's quote was, "Business has a responsibility to give back to the community." And Jerry's quote was, "If it's not fun, why do it?" So it's interesting. I like to point out that the values that have really come to define Ben & Jerry's today were evident in how these guys were running the business from its earliest days. Long before they had made any money, they were giving away free ice cream, they were sponsoring community celebrations, they were supporting nonprofits, and that carried on very much through the history of the company. Now, they weren't making any money, which is the reason why they started a wholesale operation. 1979, they started to sell 2.5-gallon tubs to restaurants. Ben literally had a Volkswagen Squareback, and he had a cooler in the back, and he'd throw the ice cream in and he'd drive very fast, which is a natural tendency for Ben. He thought the tickets were, tax deductible. I had to explain to him that they weren't. Anyway, Ben's driving around the state of Vermont, going, from, high-end restaurant to high-end restaurant. And, Vermont, there aren't that many high-end restaurants. So they're still not making any money. And in 1980, they decided to put the ice cream into pints. And that's really the decision that, that transformed the business. So they're still not making any money. They get through 1981. Sales probably in total about $700,000, 1982, and these guys are burnt out. They're 4 years into their venture. They've been working 70, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, rarely taking a day off. And Jerry in particular has put on a lot of weight, and he's had it. Because Ben is nonstop coming up with new ideas, and Jerry's on the receiving end, and he said, enough. And as a further incentive, Jerry's then girlfriend, now his wife Elizabeth, was enrolling in a doctoral program in Phoenix, Arizona. So Jerry wants to go to Phoenix, and in 1982, they put the business up for sale, listed it with a business broker. But at the last minute, Ben, as he was wont to do, changed his mind and says, no, I want to keep the business, but he knew that if he was going to keep it, he was going to have to bring in somebody who could help him run it, ideally somebody who had a little business experience. And he, put the ad in the paper, interviewed a bunch of suits, and, he was looking to replace Jerry, his soulmate, and so he rejected, all the suits, and then one day, he approached me. I had an MBA, which, as Charles referred, I was putting to good use as a bartender in this nightclub that I owned. And as he says, it was right around the corner from the gas station. And Ben, Jerry, and I had worked out a free trade agreement. It was a precursor of NAFTA. We were ahead of our times. I could go up there and get free ice cream. They could come to my place, and I'd slip them a beer, and I wouldn't charge them a cover to get in the doors. So I joined in 1982, the end of 1982. So, what was it like joining Ben & Jerry's at the end of 1982? Well, this is our world headquarters. Now, you can see we don't have a lot of storage space. That's why all of our freezers are out front. And what you don't see in this picture, out of frame to the left, this is a Butler building. It's out on Shelburne Road where all the car dealerships are. And right to we have 3,000 square feet of this 10,000 square foot building. But right to our left, just past there, is a truck garage. 6-bay truck garages where they fixed international trucks. One bathroom in the entire building for all of us. This is our manufacturing operation. That woman, Althea, just retired from Ben & Jerry after a 40-year career. So she is filling the pints. Now, you talk about hand-filled pints. So that's a frosted pipe that's coming down, and there's ice cream coming out of that at 150 gallons per hour. Off camera, what you don't see, That's hooked up to a Cherry Burrell V1D freezer, which is affectionately known in the industry as the Old Commander. It was circa World War II. These were the freezers that nobody used, but that's what we were using. Ice cream coming out 150 gallons an hour, and the filler, would hold the pint under the pipe and, swirl it around to get a full fill, and then pull it away, scraping it across the top of the pint, across the pipe, and then, come up behind it with another one and slide the completed pint down the road. And down the road was the capper, and the capper would be putting caps and, trying to clean up the spills and stuff, to make it a nice clean pint. And then they would go, through a shrink tunnel, 8 pints into a plastic bag through a shrink tunnel, and then they would go into the freezer. That's our freezer. Now, this is a picture of Jerry probably after he got back from Phoenix in the summer. He'd come back for the summers. He had lost about 50 or 60 pounds, and you can see he's smiling because he doesn't have to do any work. But those are the 2.5-gallon tubs, and those are the pints. There's the hero of the story right there. You can see I at one time did have hair, but the trend line was evident. So in my left hand, I'm holding the general ledger. This is 1982. There are no personal computers. And the general ledger is about this thick. And I got a calculator down there with a tape. And that's how I would do the books. It would take like 3 days to do the books, depending on how many mistakes I made when I ran my trial balance. Before I got there, Ben and Jerry were using a mail order accountant. They had a slogan in those days: Ben and Jerry only do the jobs that Ben and Jerry like to do. And neither of them liked or knew how to do the books. So at the end of every month, they just throw some papers in an envelope, mail it off to this guy, and he'd come back with a P&L financial statement, a balance sheet. Of course, totally inaccurate, because one of the other things that Ben and Jerry didn't like to do is they didn't like to open the mail. So I spent my first year reconciling to reality. And that was what I would write. When I do an adjusting entry, I just wrote reconcile to reality. I did find in my going through all the drawers and stuff, I found Ben's 1981 federal income tax refund check. He was very appreciative. And I found a couple $100 in cash, and I was very appreciative too. All right, we get to the end of 1983. So this is the end of my first year. This is the only graph in this presentation. You can see our sales at the end of my first year. They had doubled from about 900,000 to 1.8 million. We had eked out our first profit. That's the good news. And looking ahead towards 1984, based on where our distribution was, we felt pretty good that we were going to do about 3.5 million, maybe 4 million in 1984. So that's the good news. The bad news is that last column, we were running out of capacity. We were landlocked. We couldn't enlarge the plant anymore. And we needed to build a new factory in order to keep up with demand. Otherwise, we couldn't continue to grow. And the new factory was estimated to cost $3.5 million, the same way all of your houses were estimated to cost whatever it was. And you know what that's like. So we're gonna, needless to say, we didn't have $3.5 million in our checking account. We typically played the float. We had negative cash in our checking account. So, if we're going to build a factory, we're going to have to raise some equity. We're going to have to borrow a whole bunch of money. And we figured before we can do that, we're going to have to demonstrate that we can go into a major market and be successful. Because up to this point, we're only selling in northern New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, a little bit in Albany, New York. So we set our sights on Boston. And by going into Boston, that means that we're going to be in direct head-to-head competition with Haagen Dazs. Haagen Dazs created the super premium category. Super premium ice creams are the ones that are highest in butterfat, lowest in air content. They are the healthiest ice creams you can eat. The story of Haagen Dazs, it's a great story. A couple of immigrants from Poland, Ruben and Rose Mattis, who are legends in the ice cream world, created Haagen Dazs. Up until this point, the game with ice cream was pump as much air in as you can and put the cheapest ingredients in and sell it for the lowest price. And Ruben came up with the idea of maybe if we made a really good product, people would buy it. And it was in pints, whereas most ice cream was being sold in half gallons or gallons, and it was very expensive. So his other great genius idea was to make believe this product was imported. He thought the upper income people he was targeting would be attracted to a quote-unquote imported product. So he put a map of Scandinavia on the lid. He put a star where Copenhagen is, and he came up with this name, Haagen Dazs, which means absolutely nothing. He even put an umlaut, a couple of dots over the A. There's no umlaut in the Danish language. And he was making the stuff in the Bronx. So, but the ice cream was phenomenal. It tasted great, and it became really, really successful. And as is typical very typical in the ice cream business, but also in most other industries, once you do something, there's other people who try and copy it. So immediately after Haagen Dazs had set the market off, you started seeing brands like Frugen Glacé, Alpenzauber, La Glace de Paris, Perchenot. All these ice cream companies started coming out with ice creams that mimicked Haagen Dazs. They all took fake, foreign-sounding names, and they all copied this, very elegant bit of packaging. Now, Ben & Jerry's took a different approach. We put our founders on the lid, and there's nothing worldly about them. And we used hand lettering, that was hand lettered, and we had this guy, the man making ice cream, which was part of the original logo, and that's how we entered the market. So what we did was, instead of being another Me Too product, we basically carved out a niche within the super premium segment that differentiated us from Haagen Dazs and all of the clones. And we also differentiated ourselves with our flavors, because Haagen Dazs and all the others, they were selling vanillas and chocolates, and our best sellers were Heath Bar Crunch and Dastardly Mash and Mint with Oreo cookies. So we had a segment of the super premium ice cream market that set us apart and which enabled us to be successful. Now, we're getting ready to enter Boston. Right before we enter Boston, Ruben and Rose sell Haagen Dazs to the Pillsbury Corporation, a $4 billion company. At the time, they owned, beyond all their branded products, they owned Burger King, a whole host of other products. And we enter the Boston market, and we're doing okay. This is March 1984. Starting to make some inroads, getting a few independent convenience stores. We get a few chain convenience stores. Demula's Market Basket takes us in. So, we're feeling pretty good. Around March, I'm in the office with Ben. We're actually talking to an architect about the new plant that we're designing. And he pulls me aside and says, Chico, I was just down in Boston yesterday, and I got some news for you. He had a meeting with Paul Tosi, who was the owner of Paul's Ice Cream, which was the independent ice cream distributor that carried Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And he said Paul told him that he'd been getting phone calls from a VP at Haagen Dazs telling him that if they didn't drop Ben & Jerry's, Haagen Dazs was going to stop selling them their product. Now, Paul's was an independent distributor. He carried us, he carried Haagen Dazs, he carried about 100 different ice cream brands. But if he had to choose between Haagen Dazs, which was the market leader, and Ben & Jerry's, which had just entered the market and was an upstart, there was no choice. So Ben tells me this news and then he starts laughing. And I go, what's so funny? He goes, well, we should be flattered. And yeah, we should be flattered because we were noticed and we had gotten their attention. But it was a real challenge for us because without access to Paul's and the other independent ice cream distributors, we had no access to the marketplace. And we had no way of getting our product to the retailers. We knew that in a courtroom, in a court of law, we thought what they were doing was illegal. We did a little research. We thought in a court of law, the advantage obviously was Pillsbury. Pillsbury had 20 lawyers on staff. They had more lawyers on staff than we had staff. But we knew in the courtroom of public opinion, the advantage was ours. So first thing we did was, it's a little blurry, but that's Jerry. That's Pillsbury's world headquarters. And he's doing a one-person picket with a hand-lettered sign that says, "What's the Doughboy afraid of?" That's our rallying cry. That's going to be in the first paragraph of my obituary. Those 5 words are my greatest contribution to Ben & Jerry's. So, we start to get a little attention. We let Minnesota Public Radio know. We let the Star Tribune know. They wrote a story, went on the AP wire, start to get a little publicity. That's pretty good. And we follow that up. We on every pint, we put a sticker. It says, "What's the Doughboy afraid of?" And it has an 800 number. And people can call the 800 number, which they do. They get like a 30-second blurb of Ben telling what's going on. And then they can leave their name and address, and which they do, and we're transcribing them. And we send them a Doughboy write-in kit. The phone number is the Doughboy Hotline. And if you call it, you get a Doughboy write-in kit, which includes a bumper sticker and a brochure and a couple of form letters, one to the FTC asking them to intervene, and one to Bill Spohr, who was the chair of the board of Pillsbury, telling him to bug off. We're getting thousands of calls a week. So we follow that up with, we took a big billboard out on Route 128. We take, on the back of buses, we got a picture of these 2 white pudgy hands squeezing a pint of Ben & Jerry's. We took out a classified ad in Rolling Stone magazine, under bumper stickers. Flew a plane over BC college football games with a "What's the Doughboy afraid of" banner. All designed to get the media's attention. Back then, no Twitter, you had to go through the gatekeepers. You had to get the attention of a reporter or an editor, and it worked. We were feeding the media, and they were eating it up. And so we're getting millions and millions of dollars worth of free publicity. This is just a sampling. Calvin Trillin wrote an article in the New Yorker, cover of the Boston Globe magazine, and so we're getting national name recognition that we never could have purchased, and it only took Pillsbury about 1.5 years to figure that out. So eventually, we also hired a great law firm, Ropes & Gray, out of Boston, and eventually Pillsbury backs down, and they enable us to maintain our distribution. Now, while that's all going on, we're also trying to raise the money for the new factory. Typically, at this stage, when a business needs to raise money, they turn to venture capital. Ben wanted nothing to do with venture capital. He didn't want some guy in a suit telling him how to run the business. So he came up with this idea that we would do a stock offering limited only to residents of the state of Vermont. There's SEC exemption that allows you to do that. His idea was that the people who had lined up at the gas station should own the business. a lot of hoops to jump through before you can do this with the Vermont Department of Banking and Insurance. We jumped through them all, and that's our tombstone. Most tombstones get placed after an IPO is completed. It's just, kind of a big celebration. But we needed to sell our stock. So we put the tombstone not in the financial pages. We had them with the movie and TV listings and with the sports pages, the pages where people were actually reading. Now, you note the price there is $10.50 a share. The minimum purchase, 12 shares, $126. We had a very lengthy prospectus that gave you a lot of reasons why you were going to lose your money if you invested in Ben & Jerry's. And Ben's feeling was, if it's $126, they're not going to read the prospectus. Everybody's got $126. They'll just send them in. And we did a road show, 4 o'clock every afternoon. Ben, Jerry, and I would get into a van and load up some ice cream, and we'd drive to a Holiday Inn somewhere around the state, do a little dog and pony show. Well, in 2 months, it was a great success. We raised $750,000 net of expenses in 2 months. We gave up 17% of the company. The VCs had wanted a third of the company for that same level of investment. So very efficient. 1,800 people or households made investments. We estimated that was 1 in every 100 Vermont households. And we sent them all a bumper sticker. I've got a scoop of the action. If you follow closely, you'll see that 800 numbers and bumper stickers were very integral to the success of Ben & Jerry's. So we got 750. We have to get the rest of the money. While all of this was going on, we're talking with banks saying, will you lend us $2.1 million? And they're going, what are you, nuts? I mean, you're fighting Pillsbury. You're trying to raise money with this crazy Vermont stock offering. That's not going to work. We got rejected by every bank in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York City. Finally, a banker in Albany, New York, worked for Marine Midland Bank, Ken Cartledge, looked at us and said, I believe in you, and he lent us $2.1 million. And with that in hand, plus our equity, we qualified for an Urban Development Action Grant, which was subordinated debt. So on August 1st, 1984, we had our $3.5 million, and we could get into the ground before snow flew. And that was the key. We'd been designing the plant and designing the process, but in Vermont, it used to be, not so much anymore, we used to have winters like this. So we had to get in there and pour the concrete before the ground froze, and then we built through the winter. But we did it, and that's a picture of it a little after completion. That's a cow, by the way, that came off Yvette's family farm. It's a heifer, so we didn't have to milk it. But the factory was built to allow for factory tours. So the cows completed the scene. And we started making ice cream there in June 1985. So I want you to think about this. We got our financing on August 1st, and we're making ice cream in June. That's what, like 10 months. Chris and Val could build a house in 10 months. Yvette and I could not. It really quite amazing that we completed that. So let's talk a little bit about ice cream. Some of these pictures are blurry because I pulled them off the interstate, but we could talk about, anybody eat some Cherry Garcia here tonight? Yeah. So where did the idea of a flavor called Cherry Garcia in honor of Jerry Garcia come from? Actually suggested anonymously via postcard. Front of the postcard was Ronnie Reggae, President Reagan in dreadlocks. The back of the postcard, anonymous, from 2 deadheads in Portland, Maine, said, we think you should name a flavor Cherry Garcia in honor of Jerry Garcia. We know it will sell because dead paraphernalia always sells. So as soon as the plant's up and running, we run the Cherry Garcia. Now, the question we had, the dilemma we faced was, do we ask permission of Jerry? And we gave this considerable thought. And as it were, Jerry and Ben are out on the West Coast, and they run into one of the editors of Relics, which is the Grateful Dead fan magazine. And they tell her, what's up? We're doing this flavor, suggested anonymously. It's a tribute to Jerry. And Ben and Jerry are both real big Deadheads. I mean, they love the band, they love the music. So they asked the editor, well, should we ask permission? She says, well, let me make some phone calls. And we have no idea who she called, but she came back and said, just go ahead and do it. And that was the answer we wanted, so that's what we did. So we run the flavor, and we send an ICBM out to the Grateful Dead offices. ICBM is ice cream by mail. It's actually a bit of a misnomer because we sent it FedEx, 6-pint styrofoam container, a little dry ice. We labeled it machine parts, so we didn't have to fill out the hazardous material. So we sent it out to, nobody cared. We sent it out to Jerry's office, and holding our breath, a week later, a receptionist buzzes through and says, Chico, I got a woman on the line, says she's Jerry Garcia's wife, and she wants to talk with either Ben or Jerry, and they're both out of the office. Will you take the call? And I'm going, well, of course I'm going to take that call. I mean, what CEO would not want to talk with Jerry Garcia's wife? So I talked to her, and she's, oh, we got the ice cream, we love it. Of course, Jerry's a diabetic. We're not sure that he actually ate it, but he was quoted as saying, as long as they don't name a motor oil after me, I'm okay. So we think we're all set, but then 2 weeks later, we do get a call from the Grateful Dead attorney, Hal Kant, and that's another long story. I'll just summarize it by saying, after a few bumps in the road, and we made it clear that we're not litigating with the Grateful Dead. If you don't want us to do it, we won't do it. But we came to a great agreement, royalty, a lot of the money going to their nonprofit foundation, and it was a great win-win. So, and that actually became the model for a number of other flavors that we developed. So fish food, any fish fans here? Fish is one of the great exports of Vermont. We did fish food. Wavy Gravy. Was anybody at Woodstock? Anybody here at Woodstock? Nobody wants to, and there's nobody here? That's amazing. Wavy Gravy was the announcer at Woodstock. He was the guy who said, what we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000 people. Also quoted as saying the 90s or the 60s standing on their head. We did, Jimmy Fallon, others. It's a little blurred, but that's Netflix and Chilled, which is the newest one that just came out. And of course, my favorite, far left, Sweaty Balls. There was, when that came out, there was a movement to boycott Ben and Jerry's when that came out. I think the organization was Mothers with No Sense of Humor. And I debated whether I should include that, but it's a trust talk, and Chris Marsh has talked about alligators mating, and I have to believe somewhere along the line I'm not the first guy to stand up here and talk about Shorty Balls. Moving ahead, so 1988, we're about 48 million in sales. We've been doubling, we went from 1 to 2 to 4 to 10 to 20 million, 32, 48 million, and we're adding a lot of management. The founders are becoming a little less active. So we thought it was important to memorialize the values and the vision of the business into a mission statement. And it's really blurry, but I'm going to read you just the top line. Ben & Jerry's is founded and dedicated I can't even read that. To a new corporate concept of linked prosperity. Linked prosperity is the key words there. We had 3 missions: product, economic, and social. And what the concept of linked prosperity is, it's not about making ice cream, making money, and then giving some of your money away. What we try to do is lead with our values and incorporate all 3 aspects of the mission into day-to-day decision making. Ben would talk about not just optimizing profits, but optimizing the community. So how do we do that? Here's just one quick example. Greyston Bakery, they're in Yonkers. An engineer who turned into a Buddhist monk, I guess. Bernie Glassman founded the Greyston Bakery. They are dedicated to employing people that most any other business would say were unemployable. No interviews, no resumes. They just take the next person on the list and give them a job and an opportunity. And at the time in 1987, when Ben and Ben got together, they were mostly making the brownies and selling them in gourmet shops like Bloomingdale's, very high-end, very small quantity. And we went to them and said, well, what if we could use it as an ingredient in one of our ice creams? It would dramatically increase their sales. It would enable them to hire a whole lot more people. And that's what we did. And it's been a great working relationship. Tens of millions of dollars worth of brownies that we've purchased. It's now also used, the Greyston product is also used in half-baked, which I think Jeff will tell me is the top seller for the company right now. So I don't have time to tell you everything, so I'm going to give you a brief history of the rest of the story. I left as CEO in 1991. And the guy who took my place, a guy by the name of Chuck Lacey, is Bailey Symington's son-in-law. I had hired Chuck a couple of years earlier, 2 or 3 years earlier, and he succeeded me. And the first thing Chuck did was he got cookie dough into pints. This was another flavor suggested anonymously, but we couldn't figure out how to automate it, how to make it through the production equipment. And Chuck worked with a local vendor, and they figured it out. And cookie dough wasn't another flavor. Cookie dough was a phenomena. And that and a low-fat line of yogurts took our sales from 77, my last year, to 130 million over the next 3 years. Just phenomenal, phenomenal growth. When I left, I wrote my book, which is, Charles says, is available both new and used and electronically on Amazon. I stayed on the board of Ben & Jerry's, I think, until about 87. And then I said, okay, time to do something else, and I left. In 2000, the business got sold to Unilever. Again, a long story. I'm not going to go into the details. But I will tell you, the question everybody asks is, well, how did those shareholders who bought into the Vermont stock offering do? How did they do with that 126? Well, they got $4,697 back, a 37-time return. If you do the math, it's about 25% annual return over each of those 16 years. And I did a little research. For the 126, you could have bought 2 shares of General Electric, and you would have had half that amount of money. Unilever, I think, has done a great job. They honor the mission. They've done great jobs with sourcing, and it is now reportedly a $1 billion international brand. And you can find it if you travel the world when we get past the current circumstance, and you can go back to traveling the world. You can find it everywhere. That picture on the corner is me. That's a year ago, January, Yvette and I were in Tasmania, up by, on the north coast, up by Barnbougle Dunes, where one of Mike Kaiser's playgrounds. And the main street's 3 blocks long. I mean, this is a nothing town on the north shore of Tasmania, which doesn't have too many people to begin with. And there's that point of sale outside, and inside a big freezer of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I did not try and use my Ice Cream for Life Club card. Would have been too much work. I want to give another shout out to Jeff, who's in the back, and Caitlin. I don't know if Caitlin is here, who was scooping for us. They have just got a great shop on Promenade Street in Bluffton, next to Farm, next to Woody's, and they also they do catering. They can bring that rig to a wedding or an event, and you know, the great thing about our franchise scoop shops is they too honor the value and the missions of the business. So Jeff is very active in his community, and he's supporting a whole lot of nonprofit organizations with what he does. So, you know, after I wrote my book, I did a bunch of speaking. I went on the circuit, you know, some to business groups, but a lot to students. And, you know, whenever Ben, Jerry, and I go out, and I haven't done this in 20 years, but when they continue to go out, when I used to go out, part of what we tried to do when we met with students was to inspire them and let them know that it was possible for them to achieve their dreams, you know, with if they were passionate, hard work, and a whole lot of luck, that they too could be successful. And I always left them with this. One of our favorite quotes, you know, when this came out, Ben put this on every bulletin board throughout the company. He had a little stamp made up that he could stamp it under his name. So I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna take 5 minutes or so of questions, and then we're gonna have a great event. We're gonna have, I'll explain it. I got a little note from Jerry I have to read, but we're gonna have an auction to raise a little money for the trust, with a very highly collectible thing. But I've got 5 minutes first for some questions. $12.50! I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You said $12.50? Will you do $12.50? I'll get another one, another package just like this. $2,500 to the trust. Thank you very much.